Right, Shalawam. First of all, I'm going to start this lesson off by giving all the praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushai, Ba'ashem, Rakakudash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Honors to all the brothers who are firmly pushing the word in sincerity and in faith. And Shalawam to all the sincere believers. Now, this lesson is going to be a relatively quick one, just, based on, in particular, the division that's happening here in America in regards to these ICE raids. Because on the one hand, you have people that I guess are more like sympathetic and empathetic to the people who are getting rounded up and families getting torn apart and things like that. And then on the other side, you have in particular these Edomites, these so-called white people who are saying that that's what they voted for. They voted for brown people to be rounded up at their jobs, at their school, when they're going to court, when they're at the airport, just rounding them up, and hauling them away, throwing them in some detention center where they just get disappeared, basically. You never see them again. And it's men, women, and children that are experiencing this. And, the two sides are clashing. The people who don't like what's happening are clashing with the people who do like what's happening. And we know that division is going to turn into violence. Because obviously it's not just the ICE raids that are very divisive here in this country. It's a lot of other things. Basically what's happening is ultimately this is the judgment of the Lord upon all of those brown people. Because a lot of those brown skinned people, whether they're so-called Latinos, whether they're, so-called Middle Eastern, whether they're, they consider themselves Muslims, whether it's the so-called Asian people, those people, they voted for Trump because they thought that having that proximity to so-called whiteness was going to be a benefit for them. So they voted for Trump, and now they're getting rounded up. And this is the Lord showing them this is what happens when you side with Esau. You're going to get screwed over because Esau does not like anybody that does not look like him. If you're not a so-called white person, specifically a so-called white man, then Esau does not like you. And all these brown-skinned people who keep wanting to, for lack of a better term, kiss white people's ass in hopes that it's going to make their life easier, they're going to continue to be done dirty by the very people who they want to please. And that's why the people on the side that are like, that feel bad and feel sympathy and empathy for them, it's like, it's hard to feel bad for you because this is what you voted so that Donald Trump would get in office, so that he would get in the White House. And now he's in the White House and he's getting all you brown people who voted for him. You're all getting rounded up and sent back to whatever country you came from. The very places y'all fled from, you're getting sent back by the very same man that you put in that power seat. And like I said earlier, of course, all of this is, the work of the Lord. Ultimately, it always goes back to the Heavenly Father. But down here on earth, these brown skinned people, they voted for this. This is what they wanted. because they thought that it was going to benefit them, and now all it's doing is hurting them. And they were warned. The men of the Lord have been warning people not to trust Esau. Nobody listens. So people got to continue to find out the hard way. And there's going to continue to be protests and things like that all over the country because of, in particular, these ICE raids. And then you're going to have the counter side of that, of the people who want these ICE raids to continue to happen. And the reason why, in particular, that Esau, the so-called white man, wants these ICE raids to happen is because he's scared. There's so many Edomites that are all over the internet talking about how they feel like, they're going to get replaced by brown-skinned people. They're going to get overrun. Because here in America, for the longest time, so-called white people were the majority. But with all these immigrants and what Edomites refer to as illegals, brown-skinned illegals coming into the country, these Edomites, they feel like they're getting outnumbered. And that scares them. So these ICE raids happening make these Edomites happy because they feel like things are going to go back to being majority so-called white in this country. But what these Edomites don't understand is that America is going to get destroyed. The Lord is going to nuke this wicked place. So there is no winning for them. Even if, hypothetically, they did get rid of all the brown-skinned people in this country, the Lord is still going to destroy America. So these Edomites, they're not going to have the all-white America that they so desperately want. It's never going to happen. The Lord is not going to allow it. The Lord is not going to allow these devils to win. So they're really doing all of this for nothing. But like I said, this is more the Lord's judgment upon these wicked people, the ones who chose to side with Esau. All these brown-skinned people that are now being rounded up by ICE and being torn apart from their family and things like that. This is the Lord's judgment upon them. Luke 12:51, suppose ye that I am come to give peace on earth, I tell you nay, but rather division. And that's what's happening. And this country is becoming more and more divided, and you can see that. Racially divided, politically divided. And things naturally are going to turn violent, because that's the progression. First there's the division, then there's the verbal back and forth and the threats being made from both sides, and then next thing you know, it gets taken out into the streets and people end up getting hurt and people get killed and things really get bad. And that's the direction that this country is quickly headed in. Psalms 9:16, the Lord Yahweh is known by the judgment which he executeth. The wicked is snared in the work of his own hands, Higgaion Selah. And like I said, these ICE raids are judgment upon all these brown-skinned people who chose to side with Esau. Because they still think that siding with Esau is going to benefit them. Even though Esau shows them time and time again that he does not like them. Esau looks at us and he's like, oh, they're going to outnumber us. They already know that we, create children faster than they do. So that's basically what they're afraid of. They're afraid that they're going to be replaced. They're afraid that the more brown-skinned people come into this country, the more so-called white people are going to get pushed out and pushed to the side. They're afraid that, the so-called white man is afraid that more of these so-called white women are going to want to get with brown skinned men, which means there's going to be more brown babies being born, which means that, in a sense, these Edomites are going to get bred out of existence. That terrifies them. Like these Edomites in particular, the so-called white man, he's scared. He sees that his power is going away. His chokehold that he once had on the earth is fading. And he's panicking. That's why these Edomites are calling for more and more ICE raids. That's why they're calling for race wars and civil war, because this is what happens when Esau gets scared. He gets violent. And there's not a lot of people that are catching on to that, even though history has proven that time and time again. Whenever the so-called white man gets scared, he gets violent. He starts calling for violence, and that's exactly what's happening. But at the end of the day, these Edomites, they're going to lose, because the Lord has already set it up. Even the scriptures say that the Lord, it said, hang on, let me see. Job 14:5. Seeing his days are determined, the number of his months are with thee. Thou hast appointed his bounds that he cannot pass. And that's right. That's why Esau is losing power, because the Lord has appointed his bounds that he cannot pass. The Lord put Esau on a time limit, gave him a certain time that he was going to be ruling. And now that time is almost up, and that's why everything is crumbling for Esau. Everything is falling apart. And Esau is throwing everything, they're throwing everything at the wall, seeing what sticks. They rolled back the whole DEI thing. A lot of so-called black people and other brown-skinned people have lost their job behind that. And it's because these Edomites, I'm telling you, they only want so-called white people to be at these jobs. They want brown-skinned people to not have anything. These Edomites, they hate seeing brown-skinned people as pilots and, business owners and any position of authority. They don't like that, because these Edomites are still delusional in believing that they're superior to somebody. They still think that they're better. So when they look over and they see a so-called black man or a so-called Latino or a so-called Asian person next to them, they don't like that. So Trump, being the racist POS that he is, he, putting all these laws in place to roll back the DEI so that brown-skinned people don't have the same advantages as the so-called white people. Even though so-called brown, these, brown-skinned people have to work twice as hard, if not 3 times as hard, to even make it in these industries, because of how difficult Esau makes it for them. Like, Esau hates us so much, he'll make getting these jobs so difficult. But then all that does is make the brown skinned people work even harder, which then makes them overqualified for the job. That's the thing. These Edomites, they're so used to getting a job just because they're an Edomite. Just because they're a so-called white person, they're used to getting the job. They could have no experience. They could have no qualifications for the job. But because they're so-called white, they get the job. But when so-called DEI got implemented, it gave everybody else a fair shot. And these Edomites started to see that they really, that's what it was. That these brown-skinned people actually worked harder and were way better at the job. And Esau does not like that. Esau does not like to be shown how inferior he actually is. And so in his anger, at being shown that he is in no way, shape, or form better than anybody else. Now this is their version of revenge. The ICE raids, the rolling back of the DEI, all the violence that they're calling for against brown-skinned people. But like it says, seeing his days are determined, the number of his months are with thee. Thou hast appointed his bounds that he cannot pass. So all these Edomites that are out here rejoicing at what's happening, they don't understand that they're not going to win. It may look like they're winning, but they're not going to win. There's that old saying, looks can be deceiving. And that's basically what the Lord is doing. He's deceiving Esau into thinking that he's going to win. And then the Lord is going to pull the rug right out from under these devils. But for all the brown-skinned people that are going to suffer until the Lord brings down Esau, this is judgment upon them. Because, you trusted in him. You trusted in Esau after so many people have warned you not to. The scriptures even tell us, never trust thine enemy. A lot of brown-skinned people don't realize that Esau is their enemy. The so-called white man is your enemy. He does not like you. James 4:9. Be afflicted and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to heaviness. And that's what's happening. All these brown-skinned people that voted for Trump, that align themselves with so-called white people, now they're being afflicted. Now they're losing their job. They're getting deported. They're being racially harassed by these Edomites. Now they're mourning and weeping. They were laughing and they were joyful. And there was one guy, and there's this sound bite going on across TikTok of this Muslim guy who said before, during the election, between Kamala and Trump, he said that he would rather vote for Satan than to vote for Kamala. So instead he voted for Trump. And that's why what's happening out there in Dearborn, Michigan, where all those Muslims are getting rounded up by ICE, that's what this is how they thought. These Muslims, these brown-skinned people had that mindset that they would sooner, they would rather vote for Satan, which in a sense they did. Because, we know that Esau, the so-called white man, he is the human counterpart to the spiritual demon Satan. So in a way, they did vote for Satan, and now they're getting rounded up. Once again, they didn't listen. They sided with Esau because they thought that that was going to benefit them, and now it's biting them in the ass. And now they're crying and asking people for help, and it's like, nah, this is what you asked for. Y'all so desperately wanted to be close to Edomites. You wanted Edomites to be in charge. You wanted Edomites to rule over you. And now this is what comes with that. You losing your job. You getting rounded up by ICE. You getting beat up. Getting thrown in a van. Getting taken to a detention center. Getting starved. Getting deported to a country, whether it's your home country or to a different country that you've never even been to before. All that suffering, all that affliction that these people are experiencing is because of their own actions. They're not laughing anymore. There's no joy for them anymore. Now they're left mourning and weeping and full of heaviness. And even though this should be an example, a very clear-cut, in-your-face example, why you should never trust Esau, so many brown-skinned people are going to continue to do it. They're going to continue to trust in him. They're going to continue to, vote for Esau and all of this. And it's going to continue to backfire on them. And that's why those of us of the hopeful elect, we don't feel bad for these people. Because it's like, hey, this is what y'all wanted. So this is what you're going to get. And like I said, ultimately, this is the judgment of the Lord upon these people. As I've said before, the judgments of the Lord take many forms. The Lord, he can hurt you in many different ways. Physically, mentally, emotionally, financially. And all the people that are suffering right now, getting, losing their jobs, getting kicked out of school, getting deported. All of these things that are happening to these people is their judgment. Because at the end of the day, we all have to reap what we have sown. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up here. In closing, I want to give all the praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rakakudash, the Wadiyah, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, for putting the spirit on me to do this lesson. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Honors to all the brothers who are fervently pushing the word in sincerity and in faith. Shalawam to all the sincere believers. Hope you all stay strong, stay safe, stay fervent, stay circumspect, stay prayed up. Adawan Ratazah. Till next time, Shalawam.